if you don't have the tension of both sides, the product sucks. Like who cares about like getting just random AI thread boys and whatever. Like you need the dunks. Like that's what people actually
I
use
don't,
Twitter
you know,
for, is
it's
the
interesting.
drama,
So,
right? It's the front page
Solana
of the
pays,
internet, SBF things blowing up. You're just like on the timeline, right? Like there is an event that's happening now. You're on the timeline.
Again, looking at threads, and he's like, "Oh, I left Twitter 3 days ago, and I haven't missed out on any important conversation." Right?
Yeah.
And it's funny that I mean, this is classic journalists, by the way. They're basically the eunuchs at the orgy, and they think they're the big swinging dick, right? And yet somehow, like, they think they're taking the party with them when the party really starts when they leave.
Elon did the exact opposite thing that I expected him to do when he went after Substack. He went after by going after Substack, which is where every independent-minded popular voice is writing, completely nuking it so they have no distribution on Twitter, while still amplifying or allowing every other mainstream press to like sort of enter your For You feed. He inadvertently like kneecapped his only base of support naturally and amplified the voices that were attacking him, diminishing the product, now endorsing threads.
we are rejoined by fan favorite Mike Solana of Power Wires. Mike, thanks for
Glad to
joining.
be back. Glad to be back. Always enjoy.
Mike, you had another banger this past week, around Threads, or the Zuck versus Elon saga, which is turned from kind of silly to serious very quickly. And you started by recounting how that when Elon went after Substack, you realized that the war is not between Elon and Chris Best. It could only be between Elon and Mark and Zuck.
Right. So this was I kind of reflected back on this when Elon first nuked Substack. I immediately thought, I mean, that was crazy. Was Antonio's in this? I didn't even know Antonio was joining.
Wow.
Hey,
the cherry on top of my sundae.
We have like the full crew here.
Go for it.
I don't even know if he can hear us because he usually has some quip when he joins.
Sorry, no, I'm out of it. I missed a quip. What did Solana say? Sorry, I'm out of it.
I didn't know you were joining, and you are the cherry on top of my sundae.
Solana,
there's no way you actually said that, Mike. There's no.
Roll it back. Roll it back.
Solana is just recounting his Substack article on Zuck versus Elon.
Right. So what Erik said was that he brought in the I guess the sort of, I don't want to say, maybe it's just like not much of a prediction. It's so obvious, but when he went after Substack initially, I remember thinking, one, this sucks. I don't like this for the platform. I don't like this for the world. I don't like this for me personally. But also too, like, it just seems really, really bizarre. It seems bizarre that Elon was competing with media when he's a social media company, and the social media giant he should be in competition with, the only potential one, would be Mark Zuckerberg. Like, they're going to be in conflict. It seemed natural to me, and he wasn't really thinking about that at all. And now here we are. And obviously it's like, I mean, this is the conflict. This is a platform war. This is, I think probably there's some broad agreement here, but we can talk about it. I would love to hear what you guys think about this. I think that this Threads, Instagram Threads, Meta Threads, represents the first real threat that Twitter has ever faced. And we can get into sort of like the uniqueness of it and why that is. I think a lot of it has to do with the users. So, and again, this stuff feels obvious to me, but for some, there are people disagreeing online. So I feel like it's worth kind of going through. They have so many users, right? It's all coming directly from Instagram. That's where most of the users are coming from on this app. Whereas every other Twitter clone, and there have been, an army of these things, and people are always talking about them. There's always a political reason to celebrate the success of some new Twitter clone. They've always had to draw all of their users from Twitter initially. That's not the case here. So you're going to see explosive growth at Instagram. But then what Instagram really needs is good content. And all of the good people, all the people who are good at this sort of short form text-based content live on Twitter. They don't live on Instagram, which means Mark he does have to attract them, the producers. But if you have a huge audience that you can offer and a lot of growth early on, that's attractive in a way that none of these other clones have ever been attractive. And if he gets, like, early on, if he can get enough content producers to be on that platform producing interesting, clever stuff that is either really funny or really useful, then I don't see how this couldn't be a real serious threat to Elon. And I still think it's Twitter's game to lose. I thought that at the time of the piece I published maybe 3 days ago. But I think I think it's a real threat.
Can I amp up the grudge match nature of this, given some of Elon's recent, just with personal anecdotes? So my first dinky little YC startup sold to Twitter, and then I kind of bailed and went to Facebook because Facebook seemed like the obvious winner at the time, which in the bigger scheme of things, I guess it sort of was. But at the time, it wasn't like totally obvious either, right? That like one would go. And then I remember the recruiter who was working the little acqui-hire of the deal. I asked him, so what do you think about Twitter? And he's like, we really don't think about Twitter much. This was like 10 plus years ago now, right? And then now clearly things have changed. Again, to take us back in history, right before 2010, Zuck tried buying Twitter, actually.
Yeah.
And at least as was publicly reported, I think it was Ev or maybe it was Biz or whichever the Twitter founders was then ascendant, basically gave some massive number to Zuck. He said it's too expensive and walked away. And here we are 10 plus years later in the last chapter in the battle, just to show the epic scope of this battle.
It's more than, so that you have the grudge, you have the obvious user thing, and then you just have the facts at hand in terms of what Twitter has been up against in the past and what Twitter under Elon has been up against in the past in terms of all of these clones. I mean, you're now up against the most successful CEO of a social media company in the history of our human race. I mean, haven't been many years of social media, but Mark has certainly dominated them all. And on top of that, he's not only a successful CEO in social media, or the most successful CEO, he is a proven clone assassin. He has cloned multiple products and like annihilated with them. It's like he's like a fucking robot. Like he doesn't just approach things willy-nilly and try stuff out. He's very thoughtful and he's dogged. And I think that, it's the fact that he cloned this is a huge deal. And it's explosive growth. I think people are making a lot of that right now. That's just expected. I mean, how can you not have explosive growth when you're driving all of your users from Instagram? There has to be some immediate explosive growth. I do think the users will surpass the Twitter daily active users. And at that point, there'll be a wave of media sort of obituaries that'll be written of Twitter. And then I think after that, you'll see a slowdown and a crash, because most of these people coming from Instagram like Instagram. They like, picture and short form video. The shiny toy thing will wear away. But if the crash is to something close to Twitter in size, or even half or even a third of Twitter in size, it's still the only competitor it's had in this space ever.
Yeah. And I mean, another thing, Mike, is also the Facebook growth team, some of the best growth marketers in human history. Just imagining Javi and Alex and some of the guys who literally just systematically went after one country after another and just made Facebook dominate and destroyed every competitor. They will turn their magic to work in this case, I'm pretty sure. But I agree with you. I was scrolling Threads this morning to see how good it is.
They didn't launch in the EU, Antonio?
What's that?
Threads didn't launch in the EU because of the Digital Markets Act.
Oh, yeah, well.
Europeans, no access to the hot, shiny new thing.
Yeah.
I interrupted. Sorry, go.
No, nothing. Yeah, well, I guess, fuck Europe, I guess. I don't know.
So maybe Solana, like let me take the other side of this, because I've publicly said on my own Twitter clone, Farkas was not just Twitter clone, but you could describe it like that. I think it's a dud, and I think 6 months from now people won't care, and it will be quietly folded into Instagram as a different type of post.
I don't disagree with that. So after I wrote I think that's the lay of the land. Like I'm just saying it's a serious challenge. And then the real problem is going to come down to content, which I'm sure that you're going to agree is like the problem with, I think that's the problem with Threads right now. Especially after having, I suspected it would be the problem. And then after having used it, I mean, it's really bad. It's like extremely cringy. It's dad jokes and like, it's not very interesting. There is a chance that just I am a complete outlier here and I have the best taste in the world and the average person just has a different kind of taste. I don't think so though. I think that it's bad, and I think the algorithm is bad, and it will get better, I'm sure. But yeah, there's like this content challenge. I think it's going to keep growing before they fix
the algorithm. If it fits to the Instagram graph, and you have people churn, it becomes a self-reinforcing thing, right? Like, so the people who are using it are going to actually feed the algorithm. Like, if I stop using it, they're not going to necessarily know my taste. So I'm just super skeptical, and I think like the biggest thing, and I've been living in a world where I've been trying to think about like how do you build a social graph from scratch, right? In the context of a protocol, and I've spent hundreds of hours talking to users, people who have, huge followings on Twitter, and then have a stated kind of preference publicly that they're interested in decentralized social media, protocol-based social media. And when they churn, most people have DM'd me on Twitter to get onto Farcaster, and I'll chat with them, whether get on a Zoom call or just over DM. And the primary reason is I've spent 10 years, 15 years building an audience on Twitter. Why would I want to go do that, right? Like the rich people in Europe did not move to the New World, right? Like once you're in that kind of nobility aristocracy within a social network, you're going to hang on till the end. And it's people who are kind of like their next best alternative is like they have no engagement. There's no chance that they can become nobility or aristocracy. They're going to be the ones that go and settle the new network.
I think it's really true and interesting, and probably explains a lot of how we feel about this ourselves. And I always try and keep that in mind, like my own biases here, but it's really hard. And it's just undeniable that I have a lot going for me on Twitter and I have nothing going for me on the new one. But the people who do have something going for them on the new one are all of the journalists who are being propped up by the prior order at Twitter. And it's not just like that they're succeeding now on Threads. They're being clearly dramatically amplified by Meta. And you can just see this you look at various journalists from the New York Times, the Washington Post, who have very little engagement on Instagram, maybe 1,000 followers or something like that, who overnight, within 24 hours, 48 hours, are at 20, 30, 50,000 followers on Threads, getting thousands of likes on their tweets. And that's because the app, the way that it works, right, for people who are not following this stuff pretty closely or on the apps, you're not getting fed content from people who you're following. You're getting fed content directly from the company right now. They're trying to show you like the best content. So it's a huge growth opportunity for people who've kind of stagnated at Twitter, lost status on Twitter culturally, which would include in our sort of niche of tech stuff. That would be like all of the tech journalists have lost power over the last few years. And then all of the tech influencers who are aligned with them, I think, culturally have lost power over the last few years. It's like David Sachs' world right now, right? To a certain, it's like Elon obviously at top, but it's like that's kind of the culture right now of tech Twitter. And if you're not that, it's like you're going to go to the other one. And so you have a huge incentive to make it work. And some of them, not all of them, are bad at this stuff. Like a lot of them are funny and clever. And so if they're producing stuff, like I think there's something to it.
So what you're saying, Mike, is that the formerly cool kids are moving to the burbs, is what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, the burb. I wasn't saying that. Yeah, that is maybe a good way of thinking about it.
Can I point out one thing, though? Mike Isaac was the Facebook reporter. Like Charlie Warzel, like these are all people who just all they did after Trump got elected was spend 4 years railing on Zuck. Zuck is incarnate evil. Like we got to get, on Twitter, right? And then Elon becomes the main character. And now all of a sudden Zuck is the savior. And they're all kind of they blow in the wind with whoever wants to give them power. They have no ideological backbone, right? They all tried to use Mastodon. And because they didn't have any audience there and there was no algo boost for them, they all turned back to Twitter. And so they're showing up here. And actually Masari I put it in the group chat that he said that they don't want to focus on hard news and politics. And you got all of the cast of characters who we know freaking out like, well, you can't have like a public square without hard news and politics. And they're
Taylor Lorenz. Let's just say her name. Let's just say her name. She is the one who's like leading all of this. She's the most successful on the platform. She's the one writing about it. She just wrote her piece where she was like, guys, according to young people, TikTok is the new thing, not Twitter. And we're like, that's crazy because I definitely read that from you 5 years ago. Like, what is like you're just clearly running propaganda, trying to tank Twitter in favor of Threads. I just don't think any other thing has been comparable. Like you can't deny that they're succeeding right now, today. Like they are getting a lot of attention. They're getting a lot of activity, engagement. Kara Swish was out there talking about it with what's the other one Galloway. Like they're having this conversation about their engagement on this app that is true. Like they are getting more engagement because they died and stagnated years ago on Twitter. I was looking at Sarah Silverman on Twitter. She was complaining about anti-Semitic Nazis on the platform. And I looked at her. She has 11 million followers or something. She had like 400 likes, 500 likes on her tweets as you go down. Like these people have completely died on the platform. This is a huge opportunity for them.
Yeah, but I think it turns into the same thing that all of the clones that are based off of anti-Elon sentiment for growth, which that's what Threads is, right? Like, yeah, you attach the Instagram graph, but the narrative is very much like this isn't Elon. like Zuck is our savior.
Yeah.
Anti something else is not a sustainable growth strategy. And so I think that the thing that all of this stuff misses is if all of a sudden you get all of the former blue checks, which you could call mostly progressives, end up on Threads. It's the same echo chamber where they don't actually have that intellectual blood sport. They don't have David Sachs to dunk on and get into the Twitter fight. And that creates the engagement, right? Like no one wants to kind of navel gaze and kind of just circular, like, okay, like we're all making jokes about Elon on this thing, but we're not actually in the intellectual blood sport arena. And so I think they all end up back on Twitter because the whole point is to dunk on the other tribe and get your team. That's Twitter the game. I mean, Solana,
I think I'm seeing a lot of screenshots of threads on Twitter. So you could where there's a will, there's a dunk is what I think.
Yeah, I think Threads is going to end up. Yeah, sorry, Threads is going to end up being the normie suburb that's actually kind of downstream of the weird, edgy stuff that's happening on Twitter. That's
unless you ghettoize it. Yeah. So that would be interesting. My one concern for Twitter at this, I have a few, but like I think my biggest concern for Twitter is that it ghettoizes. If the left wing thing does happen and all these sort of status oriented like establishment people do go to Threads and live there, and it is the suburbs even. And it's just like, if Twitter's like weird, edgy stuff, it's also going to be right wing stuff. And every right wing ghetto gets pretty gnarly pretty fast to an extent that it can get wild. Like we haven't seen the wildest right wing stuff under the last 6-7 years because it's all been silenced. But like once it's out there, it's pretty unsavory. And I don't see that surviving if it becomes that.
You don't want Twitter to turn into Gab or Parler.
It's hard to just become, because they never had even the growth. They never had the number of people there. But I do think, if the culture changes too much and moderates become scared of it and just regular people become scared. They don't want to be seen as, if it becomes seen as synonymous as being really right wing and you're just like someone who doesn't even think about politics, you maybe don't want to be on there anymore. Maybe. I think it's a concern.
I think it turns into LinkedIn. Which is, I think, the valuable part about Twitter, like for the most part, is from a tech standpoint, it's better than LinkedIn, right? Like you can DM people, like interact with people within the kind of cloud version of Silicon Valley. And I don't know, I think that the right wing stuff will kind of be off to the side, but the reality is, if you've built a huge following on Twitter, that is an insanely valuable asset for you in whatever you're doing professionally, right? So if you're a VC, like, are you just going to go rebuild from scratch on Threads? No, like you're going to continue to have your multi-100,000 follower, 15
over there
compounding.
Hunter Walk left, Casey New. These journalists and VCs, they're leaving.
Right. So let's see how long they like that.
Well, they're going to be there for as long as there's engagement.
Hundreds of thousands of followers. Like they're still going to, when they want to get some distribution out, they're going to go put it on Twitter. And so if some of their shit posts end up on Threads, like, fine, whatever. Like that's a very small percentage of the network of very online people, and they're just going to kind of bounce between Mastodon and Blue Sky and Threads.
They weren't getting engagement on Twitter is the thing. I think that's the cultural thing that changed. Is like those Casey Newton. Maybe Casey Newton has been getting stuff on any of his anti-Elon pieces, but the VCs you just met, like Hunter Walk and then Benedict Evans. Like those kinds of people, those people who were very popular on Twitter like 10 years ago into even 5 years ago. And they got like a lot of status early on and it wasn't never really clear why. And they've never really been very successful. Like they're able to kind of reinvent themselves as the exact same thing right now on this app. So, there is like a reason for them to be there. And I guess, there'll be a lot of people who are getting it, provided they're producing content and people are following it and they have a lot of followers. And I think it could maintain. I think we might be at a place where like there is just another app that people are using for at least a little while.
My sense is also, and Tony, you're probably plugged into this group of people more, is traditionally no one from Meta, like who worked there, used Twitter at all. Like they weren't part of the public conversation. And so kind of like one of the reasons I think Meta got like really beat up over the last few years is that they actually weren't in the arena. I think like Boz a little bit started to participate and like you had like Stamos and a few other ones. But for the most part, Twitter is the punching bag, or Meta was the punching bag on Twitter for all these journalists. And so now one of the things that I've noticed, because I actually tried to build a graph pretty quickly. So I actually went through old school style, like clicked big names and see who they were following to try to like rebuild tech Twitter within Threads just to kind of get a sense for it. And half the time the algo actually will show you people like that you kind of want, and then half the time it's just like cringe Instagram accounts. They'll probably fix that, but we'll see. The thing that is interesting though is that a lot of the engagement are ex-Facebookers. So it's like people who like are active on Twitter, but had previously worked at Facebook. They're kind of all interacting with each other, and Zuck's responding to them. So it's kind of like the equivalent of Elon reply guying you on Twitter is now Zuck reply guying you on Threads.
Yeah, I thought that was just me because I don't really use Instagram much, but obviously I friended everyone of that generation of Facebook because like at Facebook, you would just friend everybody you work with. And so, but it's interesting to see that you also have that effect because I'm seeing everybody that now is like a VP or whatever, ex-prominent FB person showing up there. I'm curious, Dan, what do you think of what's going to happen to crypto Twitter? Because crypto Twitter is definitely a thing. And that's
crypto Twitter, from my sense, has not moved. I think crypto Twitter is very tied in with Twitter. I mean, this is the problem I think about every day. It's like, how can I move that group of people over to my protocol? But I don't think I think Solana nailed it in that the people who are making the most noise about Threads, yes, the numbers are insane. You have a billion DAO, you get 10% of them do it. That's 100 million people sign up for something, right? Retention's different. And I think they've actually publicly acknowledged it. I think Basari, I've been following him on Threads, and he's had some, I think, pretty good posts. So I think that they're not stupid at all. But I think that the reason this is blown up more than I think it's worth it, it's the previous blue check class of Twitter has kind of been this homeless, wandering in the desert where they tried Mastodon, it didn't work. They tried Substack notes, didn't work. They all went to Blue Sky and tried to make that work. And then it's like, well, none of these actually are working. And so with Threads, to your point, Solana, is like if they basically can kind of ingratiate themselves within the algo in the early days, if they can build up those followings and actually get the boost, then it can kind of rebuild, at least for part of it, the distribution advantage they used to have under the previous regime at Twitter. And so I actually think anytime you get the media interested in this, it'll actually magnify the actual on the ground impact. And I think for Twitter people, they just don't really follow mainstream media because all mainstream media really wants to do is pick on crypto. So I think crypto Twitter is probably still on Twitter. And then, maybe someone else is able to peel off that to one of their networks. I actually think we're going through a fragmentation phase. So I think we're just never going to get Eugene Wei's essay, which everyone should go read. It's like, he's got status as a service, and then he has this one, how to blow up a timeline. And it's really long and literary. So it's a good read. I think he nails it in the sense that you're just never going to be able to recreate 2020 Twitter. Like that was peak Twitter. Like we're all at home, COVID, summer of 2020 with all the stuff going on. It was just like Twitter was the main thing. And that's where Elon, I think, like really got addicted to Twitter. But
what does that mean? But what does that mean for I think you're right, Dan, that this represents, in general, media is getting more decentralized. And I think we discussed like a year ago, like when Elon bought Twitter, it's like, if he's even-handed about it and keeps right and left wing on Twitter, then we're going to have a unified forum. But if he can't, it's going to break, and you're just going to have different Twitters, so to speak. And I'm curious what that means to have a polity in which there isn't actually an elite public forum at all. Like you literally have fractured into just different communities with different values and different threads and different narratives going on.
Well, that's the blogosphere, right? And so this ties all the way back to the beginning of the episode. Is I think the smartest Elon move he can do is either go buy Substack, partner with Substack or whatever, and then get the high status. Because guess what? That is all upstream of everything that's being written on the threads.
When I wrote about that, I was like, my thinking is basically this. Elon did the exact opposite thing that I expected him to do when he went after Substack. He went after by going after Substack, which is where every independent-minded popular voice is writing, completely nuking it so they have no distribution on Twitter, while still amplifying or allowing every other mainstream press to like sort of enter your For You feed. He inadvertently like kneecapped his only base of support naturally and amplified the voices that were attacking him, diminishing the product, now endorsing Threads. But there is a world if his goal is to be the place where like the real conversation happens and you get every single voice that's not working for like the Washington Post or something, it's like everybody else who doesn't have that sort of media official stamp job, then what you actually have are the people who are creating culture, the real people, the people who are like upcoming, have an audience, are, writing in an interesting experimental way. You have the subculture, which are many subcultures, which I feel, you look around, it seems like there's some kind of for a while at least, it felt like there was a sort of countercultural thing happening. And if you're that, then what are you? You're the future. That you're the future of everything. And that is the way. I really wish that he would, like you just said, I mean, I wish he would just either buy them, either partner with them, or like very, very precisely clone that exact same. I feel bad saying this, love the Substack guys, but if you're going to just destroy them and create some really shitty other version of what they have, it's like you're just hurting yourself. And I don't understand the strategy there right now.
Well, he shut down the newsletter service that they acquired prior.
Well,
and long tweets. I'm sorry, like I'm happy for you. I ain't reading that shit.
They're terrible. I mean, my last one did really well. I think it's like Mark Andreessen's did really well. I think there is some version to make it work if you have you happen to have a moment, but in general, you publish long essays to die. And then the comp in terms of monetization for creators is the subscribe on Twitter, which is so bad. I don't even know like where to begin. There's no way no one really knows it exists. There's no way I can't, and we're always promised these features that are coming. But there's no way to know what is there to offer. Like I can't do a regular tweet to everybody, all my 250,000 people, right? I would love to like blast a tweet out to them and then have a subscribe only thread beginning. So it's like, okay, we're starting the thing. Now we get there's no way to do that. It's like, I don't get it. I just got to pay out from Twitter. So the other thing is we were promised like ad revenue and stuff is supposed to feel like YouTube. I have a lot of followers. I have subscriptions on this. I have subscriptions on Pirate Wires. I'm supposed to be getting ad revenue. It's $200 for the month. Okay, like what is that? That's not an incentive. That's not like that. I don't understand it. And I understand it's a new product, but like it's not working. And you have this thing over here that's already working. And you could work with them. He has all the power too. He could have some awful deal for them. I'm sure he'll think of something miserable for them in terms of a deal. And he'll be happy in that way still. He can have everything that he wants from them because they want access to Twitter. He should do that. They should move forward. And this should be the place where the counterculture lives, which has always been the real culture in America.
Yeah, I think that the challenge. I've been thinking more about this because Eugene actually had a really important point on Elon is really good when he's going against nature, right? He can do SpaceX, like get the rocket into space, make the electric car actually work and cost efficient. Elon versus human nature, I don't actually think he's proven that yet. And I think that the more I think about it, like he's used to being able to do this kind of rapid iteration within an environment where his competitors are way slower. They're not going to change, right? Like electric car company versus traditional auto. Like he was building while they were basically bankrupt. And then obviously with SpaceX, there was no competition. I mean, NASA they couldn't even put astronauts into space. And so I think that once you are dealing with Zuck, right, like one of the most killer founders of a generation, you're and plus all these other tools, right? Like Substack exists, Patreon exists, YouTube exists. Like this is not a vacuum. I don't think that the rapid iteration without actually delivering on what he's saying he's going to do, like there's a lot of promises, but they haven't been able to come as quickly. That starts to add up. And right, like you've given it a go. And like, if you're now all of a sudden being like I wanted to do this because I thought I was going to get the distribution, but the distribution is not translating to revenue as a content creator, if that's your business, you're naturally just going to go to the platform that maximizes your revenue. Right. And so I think YouTube knows how to do that. And I think Meta, just given that they seem a lot more competent in terms of their ability to execute, could be better at that. And that's why I think Substack is like an amazing pairing for Elon. It's like they were the bird that sits inside the crocodile's mouth that like cleans the teeth, and he tried to like eat them rather than it's like no dude, now you're gonna have no teeth.
Because it made us happy. It like all the top creators on Twitter were happy about that. It made them more engaged on Twitter. And what he should have been doing, and Antonio, you should have a lot of thoughts about this. I don't even know where to begin. But it's like the thing my sense was the thing that they should be working on was not like subscriptions, but fixing the ad product on Twitter and making that awesome. And I don't even know where you would begin to do that. But what do you?
Yeah. I mean, the quality of ads are certainly cratered on Twitter, but that might just be brands. Yeah, there's a lot going on there. I don't know how much ad tech geekery this podcast can tolerate, but the targeting on Twitter was never very good. They bought certain companies like MoPub, like ad exchanges that let you target specific users based on outside data. Basically what Facebook did with custom audiences. Remember, you know how at some point you browse the internet and you start seeing those products inside your Instagram feed? Remember how that just magically happened? I was involved with some of those products at Facebook, actually. Twitter never actually effectively built those, right? And then it never effectively built what's called attribution, which is giving Twitter giving itself credit for having driven those conversions and that influence, even though Twitter obviously has massive upstream influence, right? Somebody tweets a thing and it could skew an entire election or the entire perception of a brand. And yet somehow they never quite monetize that influence in a real way. And I think it's just lack of execution. I don't know. Our buddy Shriram might have more interesting thoughts here, but it is, a few of Elon's choices are like rate limiting an ads fed, app is like literally the worst thing ever.
He said the rates limiting thing doesn't. That feels like a response to Facebook, right? Like they suddenly realized they were scraping or something, and they had to do something. I'm assuming that's what that. It was not actually like he was trying to limit stuff for no reason.
I guess so, but anyhow, I'm sure you could come up with an ML model that would detect the scrapers versus the degens like us loading our feed for the 1,000th time that day.
Yeah. And Antonio, like the thing I don't understand is, and maybe this just comes down to just they didn't execute right or make the right strategic decisions, didn't build the right culture. But my understanding is obviously Facebook, like the original Facebook app, which is in decline in the US relative to Instagram, but that obviously monetized really well on mobile in the era that you were there. Like it really started to ramp up. And you're dealing with a lot of text-based posts, right? Like not the same as Twitter posts, but it's still like when you're showing me those app install ads or dating or whatever the spend on Facebook was, that was very much driven off of like the contextual stuff, right? Or was it more about I visit some shopping website and it kind of was then able to attribute it?
Yeah, no. I mean that I feel like I'm retreading Chaos Monkeys or whatever, but as context for those who don't know, because it's in the distant past now, I was like the first PM for targeting inside Facebook ads. Not because I had any particular ad tech chops. It was like a total sequence of accidents, but I ended up in the right place at the right time. And one of the first things we did was exactly what you said, ingest all the user actions. We called it Project Chorizo, believe it or not, or I called it Project Chorizo. Because we were literally feeding all the user actions into what's called the topic targeting system. So even now you can target people who like golf, right? And like in theory, it's people who are going to buy golf clubs or something. It basically didn't work because like the fact that you liked Tiger Woods 3 years ago doesn't mean you're actually in market for a set of clubs, right? Like there's no intent there. It's like those likes appeared on your profile. So there's certainly a sense of like personal identification with it. It doesn't mean you're actually about to buy anything. Actually, just firing a Facebook pixel on, I don't even know where you buy golf clubs online, but whatever, firing a pixel from that is way more signal and will be way more predictive of your CTR on golf ads than anything you did on Facebook. And so if you're wondering, how does your on Facebook data get used? I mean, I'm like more than 10 years out of the game, but it seems pretty clear. It's mostly used in what's called lookalike audiences. So like the fact that Solana and I are tightly coupled, I mean, if we were both on Facebook, say, we were tightly coupled on Facebook means that something you browse or consume means it's very likely that I'm also going to browse and consume that as well, right? Because like the perennial problem advertisers really have, particularly smart advertisers, is they know how to, they've got their million. In crypto, we call them whales, Dan. But we got our golden customers. Like I know how to reach them at some match rate on Google, everywhere, right? Like any smart marketer knows how to do that. What I really want Facebook to give me is another million people like these. That's what I need, right? Like the new user acquisition problem is that, and it's one of the overlooked ads products called lookalike audiences. I can upload those million people and get 3 million that aren't quite the same, but much better than randomly targeted stuff. And so a lot of your Facebook data actually is input into the lookalike model, and a lot of the actual targeting is actually like literally Facebook reaching out beyond itself and saying, aha, this person browsed or looked for this. And I mean, at least circa 10 years ago, that was the story. And I doubt the answer.
And then so why, I guess we need to have Shriram come on. It doesn't make sense to me why Twitter couldn't have done that. Yeah,
because I mean, it's true. The follow graph probably doesn't have a lot of signal in it, but so what? It didn't in Facebook either. I mean, who cares? I think it's funny. There was an ad tech thread that came up recently talking about their acquisition of this ad exchange. I was briefly an advisor to Twitter after the fact. I wrote a Medium post, believe it or not, that got me a spot as an advisor to Twitter to help with the acquisition of this company called MoPub. And the founder of MoPub chimed in saying, yeah, I was never able to actually wire the exchange into Twitter in any effective way, even though they had spent, I think, hundreds of millions in this acquisition. They just weren't able to ship the combined product. And they just weren't able to make it work inside Twitter. But Shriram would probably have a lot more insight into it than I would.
Yeah, Shurham's the only one who's like been in the bowels of all of them.
Right, exactly. And he's exactly the one who wouldn't say anything publicly about it.
Yeah, he just kind of smile.
Yeah.
Is this RIP to Twitter being like like, do we see a path where Twitter is even a $50 billion company? Like, is social media just fragmenting? To your point, I mean, Dan, you said you can't just be anti, but like Fox is anti-left. Like, this has already happened in media. We have right-wing media and we have left-wing media. So why wouldn't it happen in social media too? You have right-wing social media and left-wing social media.
But I think that the challenge is that if you don't have the tension of both sides, the product sucks. Like, who cares about like getting just random AI thread boys and whatever? Like, you need the dunks. Like, that's what people actually
I don't. It's interesting. So
right. It's the front page of the internet, SBF things blowing up. You're just like on the timeline, right? Like, there is an event that's happening now. You're on the timeline. And
so Mike famously wrote a couple of years ago, Twitter is the ideas app, Instagram is the butts app. And, but the butts app is way bigger than the ideas app. And so they're trying to leverage.
Love butts.
Yeah. They're trying to, but also remember like Facebook newsfeed, like, used to talk to your friends on Facebook, like Facebook wall, Facebook posts, like that used to be pretty active. Right. And so but like you didn't have a follower graph, you just had your friends. And so they're using the Instagram follower graph combined with like old school Facebook newsfeed posts, which it was just talking to friends. And this is what Shriram was saying in the group chat, was that Twitter also used to be just talking to friends, or like tech Twitter broadly. And it's no longer that. And so you take the newsfeed, like it's just going to be people, it's not going to be dunks. It's just going to be people talking to each other, people pumping. It's like the cringiness of Instagram, but with words.
But I think it goes beyond that. I think it goes beyond that, Eric. You say that there's right wing and there's left wing media, but they exist within the same sort of moral and narrative universe. In the sense that left wing will play a Tucker clip or Tucker will play a left wing clip. This is a fracturing like English and Spanish language media in the US, right? In that it's just like, it's different fucking worlds speaking different languages that have some very vague or overlap in the same sense that, I don't know, French media will report on the US occasionally, but they're living in different epistemic universes, right? Like, speaking of our favorite tech journalist, Casey Newton, I was just, again, looking at threads and he's like, oh, I left Twitter 3 days ago and I haven't missed out on any important conversation, right? Yeah. And it's funny that, I mean, this is classic journalists, by the way. They're basically the eunuchs at the orgy and they think they're the big swinging dick, right? And yet somehow like they think they're taking the party with them when the party really starts when they leave. But in any case, the point is that guy thinks that the conversations that actually matter, he brought along with him to threads. And he's living in his little world. Of course, he's not even within spitting distance of actual tech power. He doesn't know what the fuck's going on inside any of these companies. It doesn't matter, right? He's never built anything. He's never going to raise money. But it doesn't matter. In his mind, he is in the center of the action on threads, right? And that's where you're going to have people living inside their little bubbles. Why is everyone laughing? Sorry, did I just, was this funny?
No, it was good. It was good.
You just keep shitting on him. Like, he's never going to get married. He's never going
to. He's not attractive. He's not fit. Diet sucks. Right. He's poor. He's unsuccessful.
I didn't say that.
Not being mean here. I'm just laying down the facts of the situation.
I actually like him.
Well, let me actually speak up. Casey actually did stick with Mastodon. Like, actually, I think like relative to other people, he was on these platforms and.
You know what this is? This is Telepath. Remember Mark Bodnick's app?
No.
Who?
Doesn't that still exist? Oh, now he has Waves, whatever.
So I used to be in Mark Bodnick's app. It was small, but it was super engaged. It was threads, but way smaller. And so
that's where he used to coordinate attacks.
Yeah, it was just a big group chat and people shitting on Trump. So yeah, they would play Tucker clips, they would play Trump clips, they would play whatever. And
they definitely shared my tweets because an army would come after me with Mark Botnick at the lead.
Botnick. I love the pun. Sorry.
So Dan, yeah, I mean, Solana already said it. They're playing screenshots. They're going to be able. They're dunking, but on their home territory.
Right, but
which is what we're doing.
Let's go through what happened. So 2016 happens. And I think a significant portion of what used to be posted on Twitter that was interesting went into group chats. Like that definitely happened, right? Like we have plenty of friends, plenty of people in the group chat who basically don't tweet anymore. And they've got plenty of things to say. They say them all day long. They just say them in Signal and WhatsApp. And so that changed. And then I actually think, if anything, what it left is the kind of like remnant were the kind of like even more very online people, right? Like just like they wanted the intellectual blood sport. And so for the 4 years of Trump plus COVID plus the beginning of the Biden administration, it was just like, I think 2020 was peak of all of this, right? Just like think of like biology fighting the journos and like,
Well, we're about to see other things happen there too. So that you had the New York Times forcing their journalists not to talk about, like, not to share their opinions and things like this. You saw a shift there. And also we've been out of an election cycle. So I'm very curious to see what the next election is going to feel like. Once it really starts heating up, where are people going to talk about this stuff? I don't believe that Facebook, like, we're not going to talk about politics here. That feels like a bait and switch to me, because they're aggressively censoring, which we have not talked about yet. And of course, any app that is run by Facebook, which there's a nefarious read of this and there's a business read of this. The nefarious, that's the business read, is they want Wendy's to feel really safe when it's posting about its milkshake or whatever. And then the nefarious read is that it's like an arm of the one party state and they're silencing all dissent. And their goal is to swallow us, every one of us, and force us to comply. Either case, like in like any direction that you want to take that, they're going to have a lot of censorship. Actually, I don't even know where I was going with that. What do you guys think about censorship? Just fuck it.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think it goes back to, we're going to go through an election cycle now where Elon, assuming he continues what he's doing, he's going to allow whatever is posted there within kind of certain amount of reason.
Think, yeah, if he holds the course.
If he continues with what he's doing. So this goes back to the point about the screenshots. So if you're now on the group chat, or you're on Threads, or you're on whatever other app, and whatever percentage of your feed is just people screenshotting or linking to stuff on Twitter,
right?
I can promise you, you're not going to be this like really disciplined person that is like, oh, I only view the screenshot from the other app.
You're at least going to be there looking for
Twitter
stuff.
Account,
you're
going to be doom
fishing.
scrolling there because you're going to want to get the status of being able to say, look at this fucking guy over here on Twitter.
Yes,
and so guess what? You're a DAO. Like you just maybe like, So
if the politics thing, it's true that Elon's open, it's true that Facebook doesn't want politics, then where are these political swamp creatures going to go? There's only the one place. It would be funny to see them come crawling back yet again. They're really just us. I mean, this is like where I was during the years of sort of hardcore censorship. It was like, man, I really want some new thing. I was never dumb enough to actually think that those things were going to work, like many of these people are now. But I understand the desire. I mean, I don't understand their values. Like the desire, they want a place that's just really censorious, and all I'm asking for is openness. But I understand wanting to be somewhere that shares your values.
What if the election splits? What if all the Dems are on Threads and all the Republicans are on Twitter in 2024?
I don't know what that would feel like. I'm excited. I'm interested. I mean, I thought it was interesting. The idea of relating it back to the blogosphere is kind of interesting. Maybe that.
So I have a point of view here, like just thinking through trying to build a protocol for all of this for the last 3 years, doing this before Elon and any of this drama, is I think we are going from a world of monolithic billion plus user, and Twitter was never there, but call it hundreds of millions of users on these apps. So you're still going to have those, but that's just going to kind of be the ABC, NBC, CBS type thing. And now we're going to have cable television. And so you're going to actually be able to find, and we've always kind of had this, but I do think you're going to see larger scale networks where whether they use a protocol underneath so they don't actually have to do a bunch of that plumbing for the distribution and kind of those mechanics and identity, or they just kind of go and build a new experience. Like there's a new app that's floating around that's just like an Instagram, like retro Instagram app. It's literally called Retro. And so I actually think you're just going to see a bunch of people attempt this stuff because the market here is the entire internet. So it's a massive, massive TAM. And maybe you end up with a bunch of 10 million person social networks because it's actually feasible for you to do some of this, partially because of some of these protocols exist, partially just because things have gotten more efficient from, whether it's software development, servers and all that kind of stuff. And that's okay. Like you have this whole archipelago version of the internet, which is obviously how the web works, right? And I think people are going to be less obsessed with the one platform where they want to go accrue status, because if you don't have one, anything beyond one platform becomes I don't even actually care. It's too much work to actually develop that much of an audience.
It's funny. I think Sam Lessin, who obviously jumped ship back to Threads, put it best. He called Threads the pickleball of social media, I suppose, to like Twitter's tennis. I don't know if you've ever been involved in the tennis pickleball war. I know it seems kind of childish, but
I've seen it. It's like when you see a headline, I've seen it. So I would love to know more about. It seems like a really wild, bizarre drama. I've seen pickleball courts recently, and people seem upset about it.
Yeah, no, they're super upset about it. There's an actual pickleball hate Twitter account that I follow. For those who don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, pickleball, imagine tennis, but like shrunk down to a court like the size of 4 ping pong tables with like a plastic ball that looks like this. I'm ashamed to say I even have one on my desk. And it's like easier on the knees. Old people play it. It's just not as quick and athletic a game. And then for whatever reason, dark forces are at work, if you believe the conspiracy theories. Tennis courts are being taken down and replaced by pickleball courts. And so, but it is more, I mean, I have the ball because we've got like an impromptu court on our roof deck, and it's fun at the startup because again, anybody can pick up a paddle and just kind of play it, while tennis is a lot harder and much more of a serious sport. So, but I think
it's like sailing, skiing.
Let's not even get into that. Yeah.
Why don't you recount why this, maybe Sam Lessin's, like certain people in 2016 had status that have lost it by 2020 or diminished. You were alluding to that earlier. Who gained status? Who lost status? Why did that happen? Why don't you recount some what types of people?
You know, it's hard. I think there are a lot of different things. That it was a confluence of many different events. I think there's the broader American context, which is the sort of institutions and the media that is sort of, I guess, aligned with with our largest institutions in the country. And by institution, I mean like the government, the New York Times, like this kind of stuff, NBC, CNN, just like really overplayed their hand. And especially leading up through COVID, people really got sour on all of that. So that's like the background and in a lot of ways, it was COVID, it was culture stuff. I don't want to get super into the weeds here, but I do think like the gender ideology stuff has a lot to do with it, specifically as it relates to kids. Really, really high profile stuff like the locker room stuff and like athletics and things like that. Like it just seems really crazy. It seems like you're being asked to believe demanded to believe a lot of really crazy things. So that's the background context. And then in tech specifically, which is I think where a really huge shift took place, it was like the lifeblood of tech. I mean, I could, in pushback, I could be wrong here, but my sense, because my background is I worked at a venture capital firm for a long time. So my background is kind of that's like my frame. And it seems like the lifeblood is the founder of startups specifically. And yeah, we have like these huge companies that we all know about and we all talk about the founders and those CEOs are extremely important. They set the course of everything, but the blood, like the newness of it, which is always coming, there's always something to talk about. It's like where all of the opportunity is, it's startups. And those people, those companies, the people in charge of those companies were ruthlessly attacked by the media, and the people who defended them became inevitably against the press. So the people who went to war against the press to defend those people, I think, became seen correctly as the proper voice of those people if you're defending them, right? And so that became where status was associated with in tech. It was those people actually defending the industry, standing up, saying "fuck the press." That's not, your sourcing is ridiculous. The story's not even true. You, like Antonio was saying a second ago, people like Casey, like he doesn't know these people. He has no sense at all of what's really going on. He's just writing fan fiction about these companies, and I think there was a huge paradigm shift. And I think that is where in tech, I think that's what the change happened. And then when you're going up against the media, specifically on topics like COVID, that naturally clocks a little bit political. And so it's like the new status in tech is, I think, coded a little bit right of center, at least center. There was other stuff too. You have people like Gary Tan, who's like definitely center, but it's like he's going up against the San Francisco government. That's the representative Y Combinator going up against the San Francisco government. Like that's a huge political shift, and everyone who is young and wants to start a company cares what Gary Tan thinks. Like there was a lot going on, but that was, I think, roughly the status change. And then if you weren't a part of that wave that was resisting the press in those days, that was actually maybe on their side, begging for their attention, I think that looked really, really bad. And as people wrote off journalists for this kind of behavior, they wrote off everybody who was on their side.
Peak power of tech journalists was Uber. And actually post Uber, like, I mean, Travis didn't have, like, there was no legal recourse they could do to push him off the board. He left the board because they convinced him to leave the board based on the press. And now obviously Gurley was leaking stuff from the board meetings directly to Mike Isaac and all that kind of stuff. But I think like Uber was peak power for press in tech, coupled obviously with Me Too. And I think just a lot of kind of like aggressive reporting on tech companies, some of which was, factual, and then other, Theranos, obviously. But I think a lot of that was tied up with Trump, and is like tech went from this silly little thing to being too powerful. And then I think that broke in COVID. I think COVID,
but that was the peak.
All of the power, no one cares. They went after Brian Armstrong, like tried to assassinate him before the IPO didn't work. And then, so now it's just like, they live in their own ecosystem. No one cares what the New York Times article about a startup today. Like,
during COVID,
outside of some serious allegations, and then there would be criminal liability, it doesn't matter. Like, it bounces off like Teflon.
You're right that it started mattering a lot less for founders at that time, but it started mattering a lot more for the average person. Their influence over Facebook, Twitter, like TikTok, YouTube, like that actually shaped what we were all allowed to talk about in the middle of like a fucking pandemic. That was a huge deal, and it dragged us all in. And I think people in tech were very keyed into that conversation. I believe that was the zenith of the power. I also am worried that I'm delusional and it actually that power still exists. And I'm in this like my little Twitter bubble, and I think everything's honky dory. But like once this new election starts up, things are going to get pretty hairy, and we'll see.
We were saying earlier how people care about distribution, and so they'll leave Twitter, they'll try Mastodon or Blue Sky, but ultimately they want to promote their shit and they'll come back to Twitter. And there's a lot of people in tech who hate Elon but won't sacrifice their own distribution. And with Threads provides the opportunity for them to hate Elon, present that, and also gain distribution. Like Solana said, these same people were not getting distribution on Twitter. So now, in the same way that, yeah, sure, Substack is upstream of Twitter, it's way smaller than Twitter. Twitter is going to be upstream of Threads. All the important, cutting edge stuff is going to happen on Twitter, but it might be way smaller than Threads.
Yeah, I think it's a temporary thing. Like, I think those people won't get the reason they get such low engagement is no one actually cares about their stuff. It's not interesting. And so right now they're getting it's a concentrated network, and some of them already had big Instagram followings. And obviously if you work for, call it The Atlantic, and someone follows The Atlantic on Instagram, I don't know why you would, but plenty of people do. I'm sure they have several million people following them. The Atlantic can what are they calling it? A rethread, a repost one of those journalists, which then I actually think the best mechanic Threads did was if you don't follow someone, there's a plus button on the avatar right from the feed, and you can tap it and then you can immediately follow them there. That's actually, it was a pretty clever mechanic. So I think it's like the rate of following people becomes pretty easy, but I don't know. I don't think Facebook is going to be. I mean, look at what Facebook is doing in Canada. They're removing news links because of some stupid law that they just passed there. Same with Google.
Well, that's smart. I love that they're doing that.
Is Threads going to be able to have those news links? Probably not. Like, so I actually just don't think that the journalists are going to get distribution on any of these platforms anymore. So your best bet is to push it on all of them. And if you've got 400,000 followers on Twitter from a legacy of 15 plus years in a blue check, like you're still going to post.
We're going to see. And it's going to be a battle of I think what content you prefer for the average Twitter user. Like, do you want the old school blue checks or do you want the new class?
Well, what Sriram has been saying is that most people don't want politics, and Twitter has become a political cesspool. Most people want NBA. They want, I don't know, Japanese boy bands or Korean boy bands. I don't know what they want. They want entertainment that's not politics. and maybe Twitter just becomes the political arena, and Facebook becomes what Instagram is. But just
political, like, what do we mean by political is the other thing. And I think what when Americans say, like, I'm so over politics, they're talking about, like, I'm over watching a basketball game and having the commentator on CNN say there's like systemic racism and we should all be kneeling or something. Like, that's the conversation that they don't want to have. And as long as culture is that and that's happening on CNN, and that's happening on, they're having that conversation on NBC or whatever, like, that's, people are going to be talking about that on Facebook. And if they're not, my sense is that means that culture has changed everywhere. And when we're talking about politics now on Twitter, it's actually like political elections and shit. It's no longer, politics for a long time in America, last few years politics has been everything, baked into every part of us. And that was on Instagram too, though. Like, I have a lot of normies in my family who are just on Instagram, and they've been complaining about this there the whole time.
I do agree Facebook won't be able to, or Threads won't be able to have a no politics stance. And the question is, will it just become just a blue Twitter? And if so, to Dan's point, like, how interesting is that? How sustainable is that?
Can I do a little rant on, I think that their decentralization claim is going to be bullshit. Please. So they've made a big, bold thing. It's part of the onboarding that they're going to be part of the Thetaverse, which is kind of confusing because Mastodon is in the Thetaverse, and then the protocol underneath it is ActivityPub. So you could kind of say, like, okay, web and HTTP, like, if you want to use that as an analogy. But so Threads has threads.net as the domain, which, another side, there's a company, threads.com, Silicon Valley company, that now has to have like a badge on their website that says we're not affiliated with Instagram. But so they have threads.net, the domain. And it's actually in the UI. If you go to any of the profiles on Threads, it says like threads.net. So I do think that they're going to do some amount of integration. Here's where I think when the rubber hits the road on these details, I don't actually believe it. So the first will be, so if you're in one of these decentralized systems and I now want to, federate with you from my Mastodon server or whatever over ActivityPub, does that mean I get to like permissionlessly index the entire Threads graph, right? Because in theory, like, I could just make the API request and say, oh yeah, I want to see the followers or whatever, and all that data would be slurped up into my server. And so first, I don't actually believe that. And like Antonio, I mean, you work there. Like, does that seem like something that Facebook would do? It feels like the opposite. Facebook would be doing the slurping.
I mean, again, my read on Facebook culture is like 10 plus years old, although it's the same people running it then as now, or now as then. No, they don't believe in open systems, right? And they're extraordinarily suspicious of anything like an open system that they don't sort of control vertically.
Yeah. So I suspect what it is it's a little bit of political cover, in the same way that I think Blue Sky under Twitter originally. Blue Sky today is actually a very different thing. It's not even associated with Twitter. But Blue Sky under Twitter originally was Jack Dorsey gets hauled in front of Congress and they kind of rip into him. And then he just says that we're going to decentralize Twitter. And like, they kind of have this project that doesn't do anything. And then it finally gets kicked off right as Elon's buying it and was funded initially by Twitter. But so I think this is the version for Meta where they're going to claim that they're decentralized and some amount of content censorship they can kind of like kick off. But I don't actually think, like, if you're some Nazi on Threads and they kick you off, are they going to let you federate back in as like your account? No way. There's a bunch of other issues, like, can you take your followers with you? Which is like, okay, the way federation works with Mastodon is, if I'm on a server and they want to get rid of me, one, they can just ban you and not let you get access to that. So that is like, I think, a critical component to this not being that decentralized. And then the second thing is, if you do that kind of like sucking out the audience, then that becomes an exit valve for any creator on Instagram who just then goes boots up on Threads, gets everyone to follow them because it just kind of naturally happens, and then say, hey, I'm moving over here, come this way, and you can then continue to talk to people despite not using the Meta product. I can't imagine that they're going to go about doing that. And then the third thing, and this is my joke, and I posted this to Threads and Twitter and places. So I think the Thetaverse had 10 million people using it, give or take. They just added 100 million people to the Thetaverse in theory in the future. So does the Thetaverse basically become the metaverse? And basically now Meta is like, like, they get to decide how the thing works because they have 90% market share in this protocol. And so I think the design of the ActivityPub protocol and Federation generally is going to give Meta an extreme amount of power while being able to claim that they're plugged into a decentralized thing to make, whether it's Congress or regulators happy. But one interesting thing is they didn't launch it in Europe. So clearly they, look through all the regs and they don't think that they can actually make this work in a short amount of time there. Otherwise they probably would have done it globally. But
I can't believe no one's made a joke about the name Thetaverse and what an obvious pun it is. But has it always been called Thetaverse, Dan? I have to say, Threads is the first time I've actually heard it referred to as such.
Yeah, it's confusing because it's like Mastodon, Activity Pub, Thetaverse. But in theory, like there's like Pixel Feed, which is like an Instagram competitor. There are other apps that are not Twitter-like within the Thetaverse. But it's a model. Like we thought a lot about this from Farcaster's standpoint. It's a model that works pretty well when things are subscale. But when they get bigger, you basically end up with peering agreements, and then the people who are the big providers there get to decide like who gets access to what, like the APIs and the data. In the same way that if you think about it today, like indexing the web at Google scale is like so prohibitively expensive that you end up getting a lot more concentration in things like search just because the internet is so big. I think the same thing will happen with the Fediverse in a world where other apps, like maybe Substack says, hey, Notes can now plug into this because in theory it would all be interoperable. But in a world where Meta has 90% market share from a daily active user standpoint, I think that they can start to dictate like, no, we're integrated with the Fediverse on our terms. And basically the open for Facebook is a very different definition than what people in the Mastodon world have defined as a federated system.
If we're Elon, or if Elon's coming to us for advice, besides either buy or align with Substack, what other, like, how do we play this? How do we recommend playing this?
I mean, the Substack thing is you're like without the thing. That's like that's like my strategy is just become the place that the other people can't become the place that the other people can't. You're already that. Yeah, it's already the strength of you. Just play to your strengths and you win. There's the best content's already on Twitter. You have to just amplify it, give those people their ribbons and their flowers and make them happy. It doesn't take much. Honestly, you could just stop doing some stuff and you would make them happy.
Yeah, I would fix the algo. Like clearly it's not working for people. And so if that is more people who you follow and less, kind of show random tweets that have no relevancy, consider reducing the ad load if you're paying subscriber, right? Like I would pay $20 a month and never see an ad on Twitter. Like every time I see one of those ads, they just make me mad. So maybe focus on power users in that regard. But I think that go back to the Eugene Wei piece again. Like the vibes are off is something that he says, and it's like a Gen Z term or something. But I do think that it's a really hard thing to pinpoint, but something needs to change. Otherwise, I do think you're just going to get this fracturing, and Twitter will exist and it'll be big, but you will never get that public square back again.
What Eugene was also saying, I lunched with him on Friday, and he was saying that because of the algo, he's like, I don't see tweets from people I follow anymore. Like VC Twitter used to be a thing. Like people used to talk amongst each other, go back and forth, and now people don't see each other's tweets anymore.
Yeah, I mean the For You timeline, and I don't know the actual algo, although it's in theory open source on GitHub. The challenge is that there's just too much old stuff that pops up, and if you're a Twitter power user, so this is the other issue is like there are two users on Twitter. There's the people who use it as a social network, and then the people who use it as a media product, right? If you're using it as a media product, you just kind of want an endless stream of interesting content, like whatever. You want the AI thread boys, you want whatever, the memes. The power user, kind of like almost borderline insane people who are just always online and use it as like a one giant group chat. Like you have to show them the people that they're following because they spend a lot of time curating who they follow and show the recency. But the challenge is that as soon as you make the default For You, which is the algo feed, the amount of engagement that people get goes way down. And you have to kind of solve for the idea that like what you want to do is like when I put a banger out on Twitter, and I don't actually write bangers like Solana and AGM, they just like fall out of your ears. But like those tweets need to get like enough engagement that they get boosted, right? Because then that keeps the people coming back and producing that content that they like. But if you basically think like that this was a banger, 6 months ago, and now you put it out and you get like 30 likes over 2 hours. You're kind of like, okay, like I'm not going to keep doing this. Austin Allred is actually like, a friend of the pod. Like he's really dialed into like stuff that works for the algo, because I think he uses it a lot for marketing for his business. And he's made multiple comments of like, it's significantly changed. I think the downranking of links is also just like going to the Substack thing. It's just so stupid. You get all these like really dumb things where people like, they screenshot like something and be like, oh, scan the QR code, or like at the third, tweet down, because it increases the time spent.
It just feels low rent. And that is part of the vibe. It's like, it feels trashy. The whole thing just feels like not
right. And then the algo self-selects for 30 tweet, threads on how best to optimize your AI workflow. Or like, the like, here's this sports star who made $5 million in the NBA and is now a billionaire because he owned like KFC. Like, it's like, I don't want any of that crap. Yeah. Like, show me the interesting tweets. And when Twitter was at its best, it was something was breaking, like from like something in the blogosphere or like whatever on the internet, and it became the front page of the internet because everyone wanted to share the link, and that like naturally got boosted in the algo. And so then you knew what is the current thing on the internet today.
Can we also spend a minute talking about how Zuck's image has just changed so quickly?
I think the change of Zuck's image is kind of interesting. He's become way more badass, right? This whole Brazilian jiu-jitsu thing.
I know he was he was donating 100 million to Newark. He's San Francisco hospital. He was doing all this, traveling across the country, meeting all these people. He was apologizing for everything, and he was universally hated. And now he's not justifying Meta anymore. He's just doing his own thing. He's doing jujitsu. He's out of surfing with American flag. He's challenging Elon to a cage match, and he's universally loved.
No, he's just memeing, and you guys are all falling for it. It's advertising for Threads because he needs to get people who produce content like that on his platform. He never just is himself. He's a fucking robot, like in a good way. He's relentless, but like that's what he's doing. It's an ad. All this stuff these are ads. The American flag thing is where it began, and then the journey concludes with his cage match with Elon, which Elon, being Elon, could not help but engage with and amplify to hundreds of millions of people around the world. Billions, maybe, have seen that at this point. That's all that is.
I agree. It's an ad.
These people, they don't love him. Like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, in the sense that Elon is now the main character. Elon is openly right wing on Twitter. Took the beloved product from all these very online people, and so they're willing to kind of deal with Zuck if it just gets at Elon. But these people just spent the last 5 years, 6 years, knifing Zuck at any moment they could. Like, well, the PR as soon as Elon is disposed of as the main character, they'll go back to hating on Zuck.
Totally. Well, the PR lesson is pick the right enemy.
Just one thing, though. Zuck caved to their demands for content moderation. That's the difference, right? Zuck is playing ball with the disinformation industrial complex. Elon is not. That's a big difference. At the end of the day, Zuck gave them what they wanted. Right.
Yeah, and he has forever, really. He made a really admirable comments about free speech when the censorship conversation was first really starting. Maybe it was like, I forget how long, maybe it was 2015, around that era. I remember him really making a pitch for free speech, and he caved almost immediately and sort of never looked back. And I remember, he has like internal review boards that are sort of mysterious, and
they have a Supreme Court. They have a content Supreme Court, like that. If you just Google like Facebook, like content Supreme Court, it's like all these like, establishment people from DC who probably have never even used the internet, and they're somehow weighing in on what content should be allowed on Facebook versus not.
Yeah.
Look, Solana, you got to get out of here. Let's wrap on any final predictions. Is the cage match going to happen? Is Threads petering out within 6 months? Any final predictions?
I'm happy to go on the record. I think it's folded into Instagram. Maybe not within 6 months, so maybe a year folded into Instagram, but I think 6 months from now, no one will actually care about Threads.
How about Solana?
What about the cage match?
Cage match happens. I think Coliseum.
This is the cage match. Threads Twitter is the cage match, right?
That's maybe how they play it. I don't know how the cage match can happen. Like, it seems that the world could not possibly allow that to happen, but Elon describes the philosophy of the craziest thing happens. Elon can't back down, so he won't. And then I think Zuckerberg will do whatever helps him succeed. And if that's an advertisement for Threads, they also both need to win. Is a crazy thing. Like they would both have to win that fight. So yes, I think it happens. I think it actually does happen, and I think Threads blows up population wise. I think it overtakes Twitter and users. I think there's a wave of media celebrating the fact and talking about the end of Twitter, obituaries everywhere. And then I think engagement just slowly degrades over the following like 6 months, and it maybe stagnates into something like a third of as important as Twitter, but all of these people that we've been talking about today are there.
That's awesome.
Okay, I'm going to say I think the cage match is probably not going to happen. I think Threads is probably not going to die, but it's going to turn into like normie media world, and then Twitter just gets deeply weirder and just stranger and not necessarily right wing, just fucking weird.
Yeah, I do agree. I do think Threads is going to be around. I think it'll be cringe, but I think it'll be big. And I think there's just this greater fragmentation. Solana, we got to get you out of here. If you're still listening to this, you have to subscribe to Pirate Wires. Also, check out your guys' new podcast. You've done a few episodes, great. And Solana, thanks as always. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.